The boy was lying face down in a dry creek bed, half buried in red sand, when Josiah Kane found him. Not moving, not crying, just lying there like the land had tried to swallow him and given up halfway. Josiah pulled his horse to a stop. The sun pressed flat on everything. No wind, no sound except the creak of leather and the slow breathing of his mare. He had not spoken to another living soul in 11 days. 11 days since the last town. 11 days since the last voice that was not his own. The boy could not have been more than 5 or 6. His skin was dark from sun and birth, his black hair matted with dust and dried blood. He wore a deerskin shirt torn at the shoulder. No shoes, no water pouch, nothing except a small leather medicine bag tied at his neck with a thin cord and beadwork along his collar, half torn, half clinging. The beadwork caught Josiah's eye, not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because the pattern was unusual. Tight, precise stitching in a design he had never seen before. Lightning bolts crossed with 4-pointed stars. The work of someone with skill and patience and purpose. Apache. Josiah knew it the way a man knows thunder from cannon fire. He did not move right away. Out here, in the southern stretch of the Arizona Territory in the summer of 1874, finding an Apache child alone in a creek bed meant one of two things. Either the child had been left behind during a raid, or the child's people had already been taken from him. Neither one was safe. Josiah dismounted. His boots cracked against the dry earth and the sound carried across the emptiness like a stone dropped down a well. He walked to the edge of the creek bed and crouched, his knees popping, his canteen sloshing at his hip. He turned the boy over. The child's lips were split and white. His eyes were shut, but the lids trembled. A deep gash ran from his left temple to behind his ear. Not a fall, a blade. Someone had cut this boy and left him. Flies crawled along the dried blood on his neck. His breathing came in thin, shallow pulls, like a bellows with a hole punched through. Josiah uncapped his canteen and poured a slow line of water across the boy's lips. Most of it ran off into the sand. Then the boy's mouth twitched, his tongue moved, and a sound came from him, small and raw, the kind a wounded calf makes when it stops trying to stand. Josiah looked around. Nothing. Flat land in every direction, broken only by sage and mesquite and the distant blue wall of the Dragoon Mountains. No tracks, no smoke, no sign of anyone coming back. He picked the child up. The boy weighed nothing. His body burned against Josiah's chest, feverish, trembling in that deep, involuntary way that meant the body was at war with itself and losing. Josiah carried him to the mare and climbed into the saddle one-handed. The horse shifted under the new weight but settled. "Easy," Josiah said. His own voice sounded foreign after so many silent days. He turned the mare west toward the cabin he had been building alone for 4 months, 7 miles from the nearest settlement, a place called Ridgewater that had 12 buildings, 1 store, and no sheriff. The ride took 2 hours. The boy did not wake, but halfway there, the child's hand found Josiah's shirt and gripped it, fingers curling into the cloth with a strength that should not have been left in a body that small and that broken. Josiah looked down at those fingers and kept riding. By the time he reached the cabin, the sky had turned the color of a week-old bruise, purple at the edges, yellow where the sun bled out behind the mountains. He kicked the door open with his boot and carried the boy inside. 1 room, a stone fireplace he had laid himself, a bedroll on the plank floor, a pine table, a rifle on 2 pegs above the door, a water barrel in the corner. That was everything Josiah Kane owned in the world, and most days it felt like enough. He laid the boy on the bedroll and built a fire, boiled water in his only pot, tore a clean strip from his spare shirt, washed the wound. The gash was deep but clean at the edges, the cut of a knife, not a rock, deliberate. Someone had done this to a child. Josiah packed the wound with dried yarrow from his saddle bag and wrapped the boy's head with the cloth strip. Then he sat back on his heels and waited. The boy's breathing steadied, not strong but steadier. The trembling slowed, the fever held, but the child stopped slipping. Josiah stayed up through the night. He fed the fire every hour. He dripped water into the boy's mouth from a soaked rag. He listened to the coyotes calling across the flats and the cabin walls ticking as they cooled. Twice the boy cried out in his sleep. Not words, sounds. Sharp, jagged sounds that rose from somewhere unreachable, like rocks breaking loose inside a well. Each time, Josiah placed his hand flat on the boy's chest and held it there until the sound stopped and the small body went still again. He did not know why he did that. It was not a thing he had planned. His hand just moved, the way a hand moves to catch something falling. He had no children, no wife, nothing that connected him to this boy except a dry creek bed and a choice he had made without thinking. There were men who would have ridden past. Josiah had known plenty of them. He had almost been one himself once. A long time ago. Morning came thin and pale. The boy opened his eyes. Dark, almost black, and sharp. They fixed on Josiah with an attention that did not belong to a child that sick. The boy did not flinch, did not cry. He stared at Josiah like he was reading something carved into the man's face, something written in a language only he could see. Josiah held still. "Water," he said. The boy watched him, no answer, no blink. Josiah lifted the cup and brought it to the boy's lips. The child drank, slowly at first, then with a gulping, desperate urgency that told Josiah he had gone at least 2 days without. When the cup was empty, the boy leaned back and closed his eyes. Josiah refilled the cup and set it beside him. That was the first day. By the 3rd day, the boy could sit up. By the 5th, he could stand. He did not speak, not a single word, not in Apache, not in English, not in any tongue Josiah could recognize. But he watched everything. He watched Josiah chop wood, watched him haul water from the creek, watched him cook beans and salt pork over the fire, watched him clean his rifle and oil his saddle leather. And on the 6th day, when Josiah split a piece of pine and the axe handle cracked, the boy walked to the woodpile, picked up a smaller piece and carried it back. No one asked him to. He set the wood beside the chopping block and stood there, thin arms at his sides, face calm and serious, like a soldier awaiting orders. "All right," Josiah said. That was the start of something Josiah did not have a name for, not fatherhood, not rescue, something quieter and more fragile, like a fire built from damp kindling that might catch or might die, and you could not force it either way. The boy moved through the days with careful purpose. He followed Josiah without crowding him. He ate what was given. He slept on the bedroll Josiah had made from an old saddle blanket and dried grass. He never complained, never asked for anything. But at night the sounds still came, those sharp, broken sounds clawing up from sleep. And each time, Josiah would sit beside him and press his hand to the boy's chest and wait. He started talking during those nights, not to the boy exactly, to the dark. "I had a brother once," he said one night, the fire crackling low, "younger than me by 4 years, Amos. He got the scarlet fever when he was 7, I was 11. My mother sent me to the barn so I would not catch it." He paused, the fire popped. I could hear him through the wall, calling my name. 3 days he called. On the 4th day it went quiet. The boy's breathing steadied under his palm. I stood outside that door for 3 days and did nothing. 11 years old, and I just stood there. Josiah looked at the fire. "When I found you in that creek bed, I almost rode past. I almost did. And then I heard Amos's voice, clear as Sunday morning, saying my name, and I got off the horse." The boy's eyes were open. In the low firelight they held something that went past understanding, not the meaning of the words, the weight of them. If the sound of wind and red dust in this story is already pulling you in, Make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can meet again in more stories like this one. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I would love to hear from you. 2 weeks passed. The wound on the boy's head closed and scarred into a pale line against dark skin. Color returned to his face. He ate more. He climbed the rocks behind the cabin every morning and sat there facing east, still as stone, watching the horizon. Josiah let him be. He knew what waiting looked like. He gave the boy a name because he needed something to call across a distance. He chose Eli, short, simple. The boy did not respond to it at first. Then one afternoon, Josiah called Eli from the woodpile, and the boy turned. After that, the name stuck. On the 15th day, something happened that Josiah did not expect. He was kneeling by the creek, filling the water bucket when he heard the boy behind him. He turned. Eli stood 3 paces away, his face intent, his lips moving. Then a word came out, small, rough, like a stone pulled from mud. One word spoken in Apache. Josiah did not understand it. He waited, but the boy said nothing more. Just that one word spoken once, then silence. Josiah nodded as if he understood. "All right," he said. The boy turned and walked back to the cabin. Josiah would not learn what that word meant for another 2 weeks. And when he did, it would break something open inside him that he had kept sealed shut for 20 years. Josiah took the boy into Ridgewater on the 16th day. People stared, not with open hostility, but with that hard, measuring look that calculated risk and distance and trouble. An Apache child in a white man's keeping was not just unusual in the Arizona territory. It was a provocation, not because of the child, because of what the child represented to men who had spent years trying to push every Apache onto a reservation or into the ground. The general store owner, Harlan Welch, leaned across his counter and spoke low. "You know what you are bringing down on yourself." "Buying flour," Josiah said. "That is not what I mean." "I know what you mean, Harlan." 2 men sat near the stove at the back of the store. Cattlemen, rough hands, sun-cracked faces, pistols worn loose at the hip. They had gone quiet the moment Eli walked through the door. One of them spoke now, not bothering to lower his voice. "Army should have cleaned out those hills months ago. Every Apache kid running loose is another warrior in 10 years. The second man leaned forward and spat into the stove grate. "Heard Captain Mercer strung up 2 Apache boys last month near Sulphur Springs. 12, 13 years old. Claimed they were scouts." "Were they? Does it matter?" They both laughed. The sound was short and dry, like a match struck and blown out. Josiah set his coins on the counter. His back was to the men, but his shoulders had gone rigid and his hand rested flat on the wood, fingers pressed down hard enough to whiten his knuckles. Welch watched him. "Josiah." "I heard them. Walk away." Josiah picked up his flour and turned. He looked at the 2 men by the stove. They looked back. Nobody spoke. Then Josiah walked to the door, placed his hand on Eli's shoulder, and guided him out into the sun. Behind them, one of the cattlemen muttered something. The other laughed again. The sound followed Josiah down the street like a stone between his shoulder blades. That night back at the cabin, Josiah cleaned his rifle twice. He did not need to clean it twice, but his hands needed something to do while his mind worked through what was coming. Captain Mercer, cavalry patrols, men who saw an Apache child and saw a future enemy, men who strung up boys not much older than Eli and laughed about it over a stove. He looked at Eli, asleep on the bedroll, the medicine bag rising and falling on his small chest. The beadwork on the bag matched the beadwork on the boy's torn collar, lightning bolts and 4-pointed stars. The same hand had made both. Someone had loved this boy enough to stitch protection into his clothes. Josiah put the rifle down and sat in the dark, listening to the boy breathe. 3 weeks after Josiah found the boy in the creek bed, On a morning when the heat arrived early and pressed down on the cabin roof like a flat iron, he walked outside to fetch water and stopped. 3 women stood at the edge of the clearing. Apache women, 2 middle-aged, 1 older, hair long and black, clothes worn thin from travel, mended and mended again. They carried nothing visible, no weapons, no horses. They stood in the dust at the tree line, motionless, watching the cabin door. Josiah's hand dropped to his belt where his revolver hung. But something held him, not fear, something in the way the older woman stood, patient, spent, the way a person stands when they have walked across open desert and have nothing left except the standing itself. The cabin door opened behind him. Eli stepped out. The boy froze, his whole body locked. Then a sound tore out of him that Josiah had never heard. Not a cry, not a word. A sound from below language, below thought, from the place where the body remembers what the mind has buried. The younger of the 2 middle-aged women dropped to her knees. She pressed both palms flat into the dirt and lowered her head. Her shoulders shook. The boy ran, barefoot, leaving the boots Josiah had given him on the porch. He crossed the clearing in seconds and threw himself into the kneeling woman's arms with a force that rocked her backward. She caught him and pulled him against her chest so tight that her knuckles went white. Not the boy's mother. Josiah understood that immediately. The hold was fierce but unfamiliar, the way an ant grips a child she has been searching for and feared she would never find. The older woman walked forward, slowly. Her face was carved deep, every line a year or a loss or a mile walked without rest. Her eyes were sharp and black and held no anger, only a kind of clarity that comes from having seen too much to waste time on anything but truth. She raised one hand, palm open. Josiah had seen this gesture before, years ago, from a Chiricahua elder at a trading post near the Gila River. Peace, greeting, no weapons. He raised his own hand. The older woman studied him. Her gaze moved from his face to his hands to the cabin, then back. She spoke. Josiah did not understand the words. Then her eyes dropped to the boy's neck, to the medicine bag, and something in her face shifted. She stepped closer, reached out and touched the bag gently, turning it in her fingers. She looked at the beadwork, the lightning bolts, the 4 pointed stars. Her breath caught. She looked at Josiah, and whatever she had been holding behind her eyes broke through. She spoke rapidly to the younger woman, who looked up from the boy, tears cutting lines through the dust on her face. They all stared at the medicine bag, then at Josiah, then at the bag again. He understood. The bag confirmed something. The boy was who they had come looking for. The third woman had not moved. She stood behind the others, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the cabin. She was the youngest, maybe 25, and her face carried a look Josiah recognized because he had worn it himself for years. Distrust, the kind earned from people who looked like the person standing in front of you. Her lips moved, just slightly. Josiah noticed because he had been watching for several minutes, the way she mouthed words as the older women spoke, as if translating silently inside her head. She had English, he was almost certain, but she was not ready to use it, not with him. Josiah did not push. He stepped aside and opened the cabin door wider. "Water inside," he said, "food." The older woman looked at the doorway. She spoke to the younger woman. They entered. Josiah gave them water first, then beans and the last of his salt pork heated in the pot. The women ate slowly, watching him. Eli sat on the younger woman's lap and ate from her hands. And for the first time since Josiah had found him, the boy looked like a child. Not a survivor, not a small, silent shadow moving through a world that had already tried to kill him. A child. His face loosened. His shoulders dropped. He leaned into the woman's body like a wall he could finally rest against. Josiah watched from across the room. The older woman, between bites, studied everything. The bedroll where Eli had slept, the bandages drying near the fire, the cup that still sat beside the bedroll, the one Josiah refilled every night. She reached into the folds of her clothing and pulled out a stone. Flat, oval, dark red, polished smooth. She placed it on the table. She put her hand over her heart, pointed at Josiah, pointed at the stone. A gift, a debt acknowledged. He nodded and left the stone where it sat. That night the women slept inside the cabin. Josiah slept on the porch with his rifle across his knees, not because he feared them, because he feared what might be following them. He was right. Over the next 5 days the clearing changed. The younger woman, whose name Josiah pieced together through gesture and repetition as Adsilla, built a fire pit outside the cabin. The older woman, Naelin, spent hours with Eli, talking to him in low, steady tones, singing songs Josiah could not follow but that settled into his chest like warmth through cold timber. One afternoon, Josiah watched her unbraid the boy's hair, comb through it with her fingers and rebraid it slowly and tightly, the way a woman does when she has done this many times before. When she finished, she pressed her forehead against the top of his head and stayed there, eyes closed, her lips moving without sound. Then she stood and walked to the edge of the clearing and faced east. She stayed there a long time, alone, her back straight, her hands clasped in front of her. Josiah did not follow. He did not need to. He had seen that posture before. In his own mother, standing at the fence line behind the barn, facing the road his father had taken to the war and never come back on. Naelin had buried children of her own. Josiah was certain of it, not because she told him, but because of the way she held Eli, too carefully. The way a person holds something they have already lost once and cannot survive losing again. The third woman, the youngest, kept her distance. Josiah caught her watching him at odd moments, her lips still moving faintly when the others spoke, studying him the way a person studies an animal they are not yet sure is tame. On the fourth night, Naelin sat with Josiah by the fire pit. She drew in the dirt with a stick, a circle, lines extending from it, smaller circles around the large one. A settlement, a camp. She pointed west toward the mountains. Then she pointed to herself, to Adsilla, to the third woman, to Eli, and west again. Home. Josiah looked toward the cabin where Eli slept. Something pulled tight behind his ribs. He had known this was coming. From the moment the women appeared in the clearing, he had known. The boy was not his, had never been his. Josiah had found him and kept him alive and given him a name that was not his real name, and now the people who loved him had come. He nodded. "I will take you," he said, and mimed the journey with his hands. Naelin watched his hands, then his face. She reached out and placed her palm against his cheek, rough, warm, steady, just for a moment. Then she pulled back and returned to the fire. They left at first light. Josiah loaded his horse with water, food, blankets, and ammunition. The women walked. He offered the mare to Naelin, and she refused with a small shake of her head. These women had crossed open desert on foot to find this boy. A horse was not something they required. The first day passed without trouble. They moved through arroyos and scrubland, following paths Josiah could not have found alone. Naelin led, reading the terrain like a page in a book, adjusting course by signs invisible to him. A certain rock formation, a tree split by old lightning, the angle of a ridge against the sky. On the second day, the trouble came. They were crossing a wide, open flat with no cover when Josiah heard it. Hooves, distant but closing. He turned in the saddle and saw dust rising to the south. A column. 6, maybe 8 riders moving in formation. Cavalry. Josiah's stomach dropped. He looked at the women. Naelin had already stopped. She stood perfectly still, facing south, her body rigid. Adsilla pulled Eli against her hip. The boy's face went blank, the same blankness Josiah had seen in the creek bed, the look of a child who has learned to disappear inside himself. The third woman stepped forward. She placed herself between the approaching riders and the others, her arms at her sides, her chin lifted. Josiah dismounted. "Get behind the horse," he said to the women, gesturing. "Behind, stay." Nayland shook her head. Josiah looked at her. "Please." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she moved, guiding Atsila and the boy behind the mare. The third woman did not move. She stayed where she stood, facing south. The riders grew larger. Blue coats, rifles across saddle bows. A sergeant at the front, broad-shouldered, sunburned, his face set in the permanent squint of a man who had spent too many years looking across too much empty land. They pulled up 30 yards away. The sergeant studied the scene. A white man, 3 Apache women, a child. "You," the sergeant called, "step forward." Josiah walked toward them. He kept his hands visible and his voice level. "Josiah Kane, I have a claim 7 miles east of Ridgewater. What are you doing with these people?" "Taking them where they need to go." The sergeant's eyes moved past Josiah to the women. To the boy, his face tightened. "Those are Apache." "They are. Captain Mercer has standing orders. All unregistered Apache are to be brought to San Carlos. You know that." "I know what the orders say." "Then you know I am obligated to take them in." Josiah felt the sun pressing on the back of his neck. He felt sweat running between his shoulder blades. Behind him, he heard Eli's breathing, fast and shallow, the sound of a child who remembers what soldiers mean. And he heard Amos, the way he heard Amos every time someone asked him to step aside and let the worst thing happen. "Sergeant," Josiah said, "these women are not holdouts, they are not warriors. They are 2 aunts and a grandmother who have been walking for weeks to find a child who was stolen from them. The boy was cut open and left in a creek bed by Mexican traders. I found him half dead. I stitched his head shut. I fed him. And now I am taking him home." The sergeant did not respond. "You can take them to San Carlos. You can follow your orders. But you will be taking a grandmother, 2 women, and a 5-year-old boy who has already been through more than any child should survive. And you will do it knowing there was a man standing in front of you telling you it was wrong." Silence. The horses stamped. A trooper at the back of the column shifted in his saddle. The sergeant looked at Josiah for a long time. Then he looked past him at Nayland, who had stepped out from behind the mare and stood in the open, her hand resting on Eli's head. The old woman met the sergeant's eyes. She did not look away. She did not plead. She just stood there, a grandmother with her hand on a child's head, and let the truth of that image do what words could not. The sergeant's jaw worked. He looked at the ground. He looked at the mountains to the west. He pulled the reins left. "Column," he said, "move out." The soldiers turned south. They rode without looking back. The dust they raised drifted across the flat and settled slowly onto the sage. Josiah stood in the open and watched them go. Behind him, the third woman walked forward. She stopped beside him, and for the first time she spoke. "You stood for us." English clear, quiet. Josiah looked at her. "My name is Kaya," she said. "I learned your language from a missionary woman at Ojo Caliant before they closed the agency." Josiah nodded. "You could have let them take us," Kaya said. "A man with a claim and a cabin does not risk those things for strangers." "You are not strangers," Josiah said. "Not anymore." Something in Kaya's face shifted, not softened, rearranged. The distrust did not vanish, but it stepped aside, and behind it stood something that looked like the beginning of respect. They walked on. That night, camped in a shallow canyon, the fire built low to stay hidden, Kaya sat apart as she always did. But when Josiah came to check the mare's hooves, her voice reached him through the dark. "The boy spoke to you, a word by the creek." Josiah looked up. "You saw that." "What did he say?" "I did not understand it." Kaya watched him. The fire threw small shadows across her face. He said, "Shida. What does it mean?" A pause, the fire cracked. "It means my father." Josiah's hand stopped on the horse's hoof. He did not move. He did not speak. He stayed crouched there, frozen, while something inside his chest that he had kept walled off for 20 years cracked open and let the heat in. The boy had called him father. One word spoken once, by a child who had not spoken at all for 3 weeks. And that was the word he chose. Josiah set the hoof down. He stood. He turned away from the fire so Kaya would not see his face. "He is not my son," he said. His voice came out rough, broken at the edges. "No," Kaya said, "but you are the man who came back for him when no one else did. In my language, there is more than one kind of father." The canyon held the silence between them. Somewhere above, a night bird called and received no answer. Josiah wiped his face with the back of his hand and sat down on the far side of the fire. Neither of them spoke again for a long time, and that was enough. Kaya told him more that night, not all at once, in pieces, the way a person tells a story they have carried too long. Her husband had been a warrior, not a raider, a hunter who fed his family and bothered no one. 3 seasons ago, soldiers rode into their camp and told them to walk to the reservation, a long walk. Her husband refused. They shot him where he stood. She said it the way a person says a thing they have said before, inside their own head. 100 times, flat, factual, every word placed carefully like stones laid in a row. "I watched him fall," Kaya said, "and then I walked." Josiah felt the weight of her words settle between them like a boulder lowered into a creek bed. "I am sorry," he said. Kaya shook her head. "Sorry does not change it, but you," she pointed at him, "you are different. I watch you. You do not take, you give." She looked toward the sleeping boy. "That is why I tell you what I tell you now." Josiah waited. "The boy, his name is not Eli." "I know," Josiah said. "I just needed something to call him." "His name is Goyakla." Josiah repeated it under his breath. Goyakla. The syllables felt unfamiliar on his tongue. "It means the one who yawns," Kaya said, and for the first time something close to a smile touched her mouth. "His grandfather chose the name. It is a family name. The boy carries it from his grandfather, the way your people pass a father's name to a son." Josiah looked at her. "His grandfather is still alive," Kaya said. "He is with our people in the mountains. He has been searching for the boy since the raid." "The raid that left the boy in the creek bed." Kaya nodded. "Mexican traders. They came at night, took children to sell across the border. The boy fought. They cut him and left him because he was too small to be worth the trouble." Josiah's hands tightened on the saddle blanket he was holding. "His grandfather," Kaya continued. "He sent us to find the boy. He heard from a trader that a white man in a cabin near Ridgewater had taken in an Apache child. He sent us to see if it was true, and to see what kind of man had done this thing." "What kind of man?" Josiah repeated. "Yes." Kaya looked at him with those steady, fire-lit eyes. "Because if you had been the wrong kind, we would not have come to your door with open hands." The words hung in the dark air. Josiah understood what she was not saying. If he had been the wrong kind of man, they would have come with something else entirely. "His grandfather," Josiah said. "What is his name?" Kaya watched him for a long time. The fire cracked and sent a scatter of sparks upward into the dark. "You will meet him tomorrow," she said. "Then you will know." On the 3rd day they climbed. The path narrowed into rock and scrub pine and switchbacks that made the mare snort and balk. The air cooled. Nayland moved faster, her feet sure on ground she recognized. They crested a ridge in late afternoon. Josiah stopped. Below them, in a hidden valley between 2 granite walls, a camp spread along a creek bed. Wickiups among the pines, smoke rising from cook fires, children chasing each other along the water, dogs, horses, people. Eli stood at the ridge's edge. His body went still. Then he ran. Down the slope, bare feet slipping on loose rock, catching himself, running again. Atsila called after him. He did not stop. A man appeared at the edge of the camp. Not tall, built low and thick like the rocks themselves. Gray hair tied back with a strip of hide. A face carved by decades of sun and war and grief and survival. He moved slowly, the way a man moves who has learned that patience outlasts everything. The boy reached him. The old man knelt. He gathered the child against his chest. He did not move, did not speak. He just held the boy, one hand cradling the back of his head, fingers tracing the scar where the blade had cut. The camp went quiet, every voice, every movement, even the dogs stopped. A grandfather holding a boy he thought he had lost. Josiah stood on the ridge and watched. The tightness in his chest had spread until it filled him entirely, throat to stomach, and he could not tell if what he felt was grief or gratitude or both. Beside him, Nayland placed her hand on his arm and spoke a single word. He did not know its meaning, but the sound of it carried everything at once, sorrow and thanks, and the particular weight of watching someone you love be given back. They descended. The camp received them with caution. Josiah was the first white man most of these people had seen in months, and the last ones had carried rifles. But Nayland walked at his left and Kaya walked at his right, and that was passport enough. The old man waited at the center of the camp. Goyakla stood beside him, the boy's hand gripping his grandfather's fingers. The old man's eyes found Josiah and held him. Sharp, black, unblinking, eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. This was a man who had buried people he loved and burned the grief into something harder than the mountains around him. He spoke, Kaya translated. He says you kept his grandson alive. I did what anyone should have done. Kaya translated. The old man listened and shook his head. He says no, not anyone. Most men would have ridden past. Most men would have seen an Apache child and seen a problem. You saw a boy. The old man spoke again, longer this time. He says the medicine bag told them everything. The beadwork is his wife's pattern. She stitched it before she died. Only his family carries that design. When Nayland saw it around the boy's neck, she knew. Josiah looked at the bag on Eli's chest. The lightning bolts, the four-pointed stars. A dead woman's hands had stitched that pattern, and it had carried her grandson across the desert and into the arms of a stranger who did not understand its meaning, but kept it safe anyway. He wants to give you something, Kaya said. He says a life for a life is the oldest law there is. The old man reached into his clothing and pulled out a knife. Leather and sinew handle, worn smooth by years. The blade was short but ground sharp enough to catch the light and throw it back cold. He held it out. Josiah took it. The weight settled into his palm, and he understood that this was not a tool. It was a piece of the old man's life, a thing carried through wars and losses and distances that Josiah could not count. Tell him I will honor it. Kaya spoke. The old man listened. Something moved behind his eyes, not a smile, something older and more private. An acknowledgement between two men who had both failed to save someone they loved and who recognized that wound in each other across every difference that stood between them. Then the old man spoke once more, and Kaya's face changed. She stared at the old man, then at Josiah, then back. What did he say? Kaya took a breath. He says the soldiers will come, soon. He knows they are closing the circle. He says when that day comes, he will not go quietly, he will fight. Josiah nodded. I believe him. He says he wants you to know his name, his true name, because one day the white world will know it too, but they will know it wrong. He wants one white man to carry it as it was given. The old man straightened. He pulled the boy closer to his side. He looked at Josiah with the full force of those black, ancient, unyielding eyes, and the mountains themselves seemed to lean in. He spoke his name. Goyakla, Kaya said. The one who yawns, it is a family name. The boy carries it from his grandfather, the way your people pass a father's name to a son. Josiah looked at the old man. The old man looked back. But the soldiers, Kaya continued, her voice dropping to almost nothing, they do not call him Goyakla. The wind moved through the pines, and the whole valley seemed to hold its breath. They called him Geronimo. The name landed like a hammer on an anvil. It rang through Josiah's chest and did not stop ringing. He stood in the presence of a man whose name would one day be shouted by every cavalryman on the frontier, printed in newspapers from New York to San Francisco, spoken with fear by generals and presidents and schoolchildren for 100 years. But here, in this moment, in this hidden valley, he was a grandfather on his knees in the dirt, holding a child he thought he had lost, with tears he would never let anyone see drying in the creases of his face. Josiah stayed one more night. In the morning, the boy stood beside his grandfather and watched Josiah saddle the mare. The child's face was calm, whole, returned to the place and the people he belonged to. Goyakla walked forward. He placed his small hand flat against Josiah's forearm and held it there. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Then he spoke, that same word, the one from the creek bank. Shida. This time Josiah understood. He crouched down until he was level with the boy. He placed his own hand on the child's shoulder and held it there, the way he had held his hand on the boy's chest through all those dark, broken nights. You be strong, Josiah said. You hear me. The boy nodded. Josiah stood, he mounted. Nayland raised her hand. Etzilla pressed her palm to her heart. Kaya met his eyes and held them. You are always welcome, Kaya said, in the mountains with our people for as long as they stand. Josiah turned the mare and rode out of the valley, up through the pines, over the ridge, into the open country beyond. He did not look back. The ride to the cabin took 3 days alone. When he arrived, the clearing was empty. The fire pit Etzilla had built was cold. The cabin door stood open the way he had left it. Inside, the bedroll where the boy had slept was folded neatly against the wall. Beside it, on the plank floor, sat one small moccasin, the left one. The boy had been wearing it the morning the women came, and it must have fallen off when he ran. Josiah picked it up. Deerskin, worn soft, stitched with small, careful hands. He turned it over and found along the sole the same pattern, lightning bolts and 4-pointed stars. He placed it on the shelf above the fireplace, beside the red stone Nayland had given him, and the knife Geronimo had placed in his hands. 3 things, a stone, a blade, and a child's shoe. Everything Josiah Kane had left of the boy he had pulled from a creek bed and called Eli, and held through the screaming nights, and carried west across open desert past cavalry patrols, and into the arms of a grandfather whose name the whole world would learn. He never told anyone. Not Harlan Welch, not the cattlemen, not the soldiers who came through Ridgewater asking questions about Apache holdouts in the dragoons. He told no one, because some stories are not meant to be told. They are meant to be kept, the way a man keeps a stone given in gratitude, or a knife given in honor, or a moccasin left behind by a boy who once called him father in a language he did not speak. Years later, when the newspapers printed the name Geronimo in letters thick and black, when soldiers cursed it, and politicians debated it, and the whole country argued over what to do about the Apache warrior who would not surrender, Josiah Kane sat on his porch in the Arizona dusk and said nothing. He just reached up to the shelf and touched the small moccasin, and remembered a boy in a creek bed, half buried in red sand, who had gripped his shirt and held on. The story you have been listening to contains many fictional elements recreated with the aid of imagination and creativity. These fictional details are not intended to change history, but to evoke the spirit of the Old West, where people had to live amidst harsh conditions, make difficult choices, and accept the consequences. Through this story, I only hope to share some valuable lessons about compassion, courage, and the simple act of seeing another person as human when the rest of the world refuses to. Things that remain relevant even as time passes. If this story felt honest and worth your time, let me know with a number 1 in the comments. And if you would like to return for another tale, consider subscribing. I love you all, the esteemed audience of Wild West Tales.